So skill 4 is EE1, which is expressions with rational coefficients. Remember, coefficients is the number that's located directly next to the variable. So let's look at number 1. The instructions say simplify the expressions shown below. So another key part of the standard is the distributive property. So whenever you have a number directly outside the parentheses, you know you need to distribute it throughout the parentheses. So I always circle my number and then draw arrows to what I need to do, which numbers I need to multiply. So 5 times negative 7 is negative 35, and 5 times negative 3v is negative 15v. And then I pull down the number that was not used. This is not the most simplified form though, because I see that there are like terms. So negative 15v plus 3v. My signs are different, so I end up subtracting and keeping the sign of the greater number. 15 minus 3 is 12, and 15 has the higher absolute value, so I keep that sign. So I have negative 35 minus 12v. So let's look at number 2. We've got negative 3 and 2/10, parentheses 2, minus 4 and 5/10 v. So again, I'm going to circle my number that's outside of my parentheses because that's what I need to distribute within the parentheses. So I've got negative 3 and 2/10 multiplied times 2. So 3.2 times 2 is going to be 6.4, but don't forget your negative. A negative times a positive is a negative. So now we have negative 3 and 2/10 multiplied times negative 4 and 5/10 v. So a negative times a negative is a positive. And let's go ahead and do our math. So 3.2 multiplied times 4.5. 5 times 2 is 10. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 1 is 16. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 3 is 12. And then I add 0 plus 0. 6 plus 4 is 14. Carry my 1. 1 plus 1 is 2, plus 2 is 4 and 1. So this is the major mistake I see you guys make, is you put the decimal in the incorrect spot. So when you're multiplying, count how many place values are behind the decimal. So I've got 1, 2. So down here I need to count 1, 2, then drop my decimal. So I know this is going to be 14.4 v. And I can't simplify any further because they're unlike terms. Now I need to simplify, again using the distributive property, but this time we have fractions that we're going to have to use our operations on. So I circle my negative 2/9, and I'm going to draw my arrows to what I need to multiply by. The first one is negative 2 over 9 multiplied times 1/2 v. Okay, so 2 times 1 is 2, 9 times 2 is 8, and don't forget your variable. 18. Oops. So now I have 2 over 18b. Now I need to distribute my negative 2/9 to 1/3. So negative 2 over 9 multiplied times 1/3 equals. So a negative 2 times a 1 is a negative 2, and 9 times 3 is 27. Don't forget to write your negative whenever you're rewriting the problem. So let's double check our work. We've got negative 2 over 9 multiplied times 1/2. Well, we know that a negative times a positive is a negative, so we need to make sure we have our negatives for both answers. Now, if you look at this answer that we have, we can simplify one step further. Looking here, this 2 over 27 has no common factors. But if I look here, 2 is a common factor between 2 and 18. So I know that 2 could go into both numerator and denominator. So I can rewrite this as 2 divided by 2 is 1. 18 divided by 2 is 9. So my most simplified version would be negative 1/9 b plus a negative 2 over 27. Now we're moving on to practice factoring. If you remember, according to our Math Maniac, the opposite of distributive property is to factor. So the first thing I always do when I see a factoring problem is I write my empty set of parentheses, because I'm going to fill in as I go and make sure that I fill in the parentheses. So let's first start with numerators. I need to find a number that can be multiplied into both 3 and 6. Well, a common factor would be a 3. So what times 3 would make a negative 3? Well, a negative 1, because negative 1 times 3 would be negative 3. Plus, now what times 3 would make 6? Well, 2. So now I can move on to my denominators. Okay, what number will go both into 81 and 63? Well, I know that 9 does. So what times 9 makes 81? Well, 9 times 9 makes 81. Don't forget to include your variable. Now, what times 9 makes 63? Well, 7 times 9 makes 63. So that is that problem factored. So let's double check our work. So the way you would double check your work when you factor a problem is simply by going ahead and distributing it out to make sure you have the same answer. So if I have 3 over 9, I would factor that to everything inside my parentheses. Well, 3 over 9 times negative 1 over 9, a negative 1 times 3 is negative 3. 9 times 9 is 81. Well, does this number match this? It does, so we're on the right track. So now we have 3 over 9 multiplied times 2 over 7. 3 times 2 is 6. 9 times 7 is 63. So does this match this? Yes, it does. So this is the correct answer factored. Before we get started on the next one, let's do a quick review of exponents. Whenever a number is squared, that would be the same thing as multiplying that number twice. So x squared is the same thing as x multiplied times x. 2 squared is the same thing as 2 times 2. Okay? So that means that this y squared would be the same thing as writing it as y times y. Okay? Now with that information, let's go ahead and factor out this problem. First thing I always do is create an empty set of parentheses. And I'm going to start with my coefficient, or my number. I need to find a number that goes into both 6 and 18.6. Okay? So looking at this, I know that 6 goes into both of these numbers. So I'm going to put 6 on the outside of my parentheses. And I need to figure out how many times 6 can go into 18.6. So off to the side, I'm going to do my math. 6 can go into 18 3 times. 3 times 6 is 18. Pull down my 6. Make sure you bring your decimal up. How many times does 6 go into 6? Well, 1 time. So I know that 6 times 3.1 equals 18.6. Okay, so let's move to the next one. I've got y in both parts of my problem. So I know that y can go on the outside of my parentheses. But we know that y times y is what makes y squared. So I need to put a y inside my parentheses as well. Keep my addition sign. Is there an x that I can put over here? No, because it's not in the first problem. But there is a y. So I'm going to leave my x, but now my y is already on the outside, so I don't need to rewrite it. So this is the problem factored, but I want to go ahead and let's check our work. Remember to check work, you just distribute out the problem to make sure it equals the number of which you factored. So I start off by circling what I need to distribute, and 6y times y would be 6y squared, because you've got y times y, which would be y squared. plus 6 times 3.1, which we know is 18.6, x times y. And this matches this, so it is in fact correct. So this last problem, the direction says rewrite each expression in its simplest form. So you know that you need to simplify into lowest possible form. So right here we have 5/40n plus 17 minus 7/8n plus 16. So remember, whenever you don't have a number right next to a parentheses, it's understood that there's a 1 there. And here you have to still use the distributive property. So this -1 is going to get distributed throughout the parentheses. So the main thing that happens here is we know that any number times 1 is just itself, but you have to remember that negative. So if I was to rewrite this, it would be written -7/8n, and a negative times a positive is a negative, minus 16. So again, I just distributed this negative throughout the parentheses. And now I can bring down my other portion of the problem. Now in order to simplify, it's just a case of combining like terms. So I know that 5/40n is like with -7/8n because they both have a variable of n. So off to the side, I'm going to put 5/40 minus 7/8. Now we know that the rule for subtracting fractions is we have to have like denominators. Well, 8 can go into 40, so I'm going to use 40 as my like denominator. To get from 8 to 40, I have to multiply times 5. So 8 times 5 is 40, 7 times 5 is 35, and I'm going to pull down my 5/40. Okay? I'm subtracting a number that's bigger than the original. So what I'm really going to end up doing is subtracting and keeping the sign of the greater number, which in this case is going to be negative. So 35 minus 5 is 30/40, which is negative. But is that in the most simplified form? No. I can simplify that down to -3/4. But don't forget your variable, which is n. So now I've combined those like terms. So all that's left is 17 minus 16, which leaves me with a +1.